The 9th generation of consoles released in early November of 2020, Sony with their follow-up to their absurdly successful PS4, the aptly named PS5, and Microsoft with their not as successful Xbox One with the Xbox Series X. Doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. With Sony's promise to follow up its famous exclusive titles, and Microsoft making ground with their Game Pass service, the generation was looking to be the biggest and best yet. But at release, neither company really had much to tout for launch titles, and more attention was on their respective backwards compatibility options. Despite the strong sales, they weren't as strong as expected, as scalpers immediately began sniping consoles by the dozens, and retail stores were slow to restock. So the few games that were available really weren't getting played, because anyone actually interested in playing those games were beholden to the inflated market. Both companies were bad about this, but Sony especially, because people were having bots stealing PS5s out of their digital shopping carts during the pre-orders and after release, and people camping outside physical stores to grab what actually made it to the sales floor. Jeez, looking back on this mess is something. It's almost like we were in the middle of some kind of global event that disrupted supply chains so they couldn't keep up with the demand, and then didn't do anything about the scalpers from running rampant, while everyone else was not doing so well financially. I decided early on I was just gonna wash my hands of it, and not even get wrapped up in the contest to get a plastic box that made the games look a bit shinier. FOMO could go shove it up their teraflops. It was not worth it to me to try and battle it out with other people camping at stores, and it sure as hell wasn't worth forking over nearly double or more to some half-baked highwayman. Not that I even had the money either way, because at the time the checkbook wasn't doing so well. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you it was 2 years before I even saw a PS5 in a store. One, that is. Around that time, a friend of mine finally got one because he saw one out in the wild for the first time in years and snatched it up. Funny story, I had some relatives visit around the holidays of 2021, and my cousin was telling me about his roommate who was actually a PS5 scalper. I expressed my disdain for him, but then the next day he got a call letting him know that his place had been broken into, but the only things that were stolen were some PS5s.
Karma is where if you do something good, something good happens to you. And if you do something bad, something bad happens to you.
I did manage to dip my toes in the next gen because I was able to get an Xbox Series X through Xbox All Access. I got it at the top of 2021 with a reasonable payment plan and 2 years of Game Pass. The things I hated about the Xbox One being kind of slow and unintuitive, I loved about the Xbox Series X because it's way faster, it built in performance boost to some of the older titles, and it was just always encouraging me to keep playing games of all different types, discovering loads of indie games that I might not have played before but now I won't shut up about, to old and new console exclusives as soon as they came out. I wasn't worried about scrambling to get a PS5 because a lot of stuff I wanted to play was still releasing on PS4. Spiderman Miles Morales, Last of Us 2, God of War Ragnarok. Yeah, I'm sure the 4K visuals and or 60 FPS gameplay would have made those experiences better, but they were still great without them. But now, after nearly 4 years, I finally got my hands on a PS5. I had some money ahead and things were looking up. Then I did my taxes and other life stuff happened, so that whole thing went up in smoke. But then the smoke cleared and it turned out there was a payment plan option on the PSN website. So I was able to land myself a disc drive PS5 bundled with Spider-Man 2 for just shy of $500 after taxes, that I'm still steadily paying off. If you'd like to help me do that, Patreon and Ko-fi. The system itself is really nice, with similar internals to the Series X, but the DualSense controller is what really sticks out. A lot of the functionality I liked about the DualShock 4 has returned. Between the smooth touchpad that acts as a large select button, the speaker and lights that add this physical and visual immersion to some games, now accompanied by HD rumble that can send different waves of vibrations to specific parts of the controller, and the adaptive triggers that add varying degrees of resistance depending on what actions they're being used for in-game. Most of that's only really applicable to the exclusive titles, but even still, I can now play all the games in my digital library that are still available, and even use my PS4 discs, like the Deadpool game that's been delisted. This is fun, but boy does this not run great. But what does run great is everything optimized for the PS5. Just look at the stunning 4K graphics. Actually, all my footage is 1080p because I forgot to set my Elgato to record in 4K. I mean, it looks great, but all it does for me is double my file sizes and render times, so the fidelity isn't the most important thing to me. But what is important are the games. Sony was killing it with their PS4 exclusives, and some of them are in my short list of all-time favorite games. So what does this latest generation of PlayStation powerhouses have to offer? Between reigniting my PS Plus account for the first time in ages and some games being on sale, I've got a lot of catching up to do. So I'm just going to talk about some of the earliest and newest exclusives that I missed, get back to some that have changed due to a next-gen upgrade, and overall, have fun. This is going to be a mix of short reviews and first impressions of some of what Sony has to offer this late in the life cycle of the system. Was this inspired by Kid Icarus's video where he talked about the expense of the PS5 and what he was able to play when the system first launched? No, not at all. It just so happens that in the lead up to getting mine, I was rewatching some video reviews of games to add to a lineup, and then that just so happened to bump his video back into my recommendations, and rewatching it gave me the idea.
So, how am I feeling about the money I invested into the PS5 at this point and still haven't had back? Yep, that about sums it up.
His takeaway at the time was that there wasn't enough new stuff to really justify the cost, but he liked the system itself and foresaw a bright future for it once it became more available, and when the real big ticket items released. And now that we're in that future, this is my chance to catch up on the things I missed, and what I think the further future could look like. Thanks for the inspiration, Gaddy.
You cheeky little
Starting with the game that comes with the hardware, Astro's Playroom. Astro has been a sort of mascot for Sony lately, but more as the face of the consoles and peripherals themselves, making his debut on the VR headset for the PS4. And now on the PS5, he's starring in a platformer that touts the inner workings of the system and the functionality of the DualSense controller. Astro is a cute little buddy that looks like Eve from WALL-E with legs, and they're thrust into the central processing unit of the PS5. From that center, you travel into the other components of the console that demonstrate just how gosh dang great the system you bought is. Each level is a collectathon themed around a specific function of the system, while you collect memorabilia of previous generations of PlayStation consoles in the form of artifacts. The memory meadow has you traveling across windy plateaus that make the controller vibrate when you're getting blown off balance by the clouds, and as the weather changes, the sound effects from the controller become different, from the soft gentle rain to the sharp ting of hail. And eventually you make your way through a thunderstorm caused by the ram that's electrifying some of the platforms. The cooling springs themed around the system's fans and cooling fluid, starting off with a bright sandy beach as the grains of sand crunch under your little feet. And as you progress, it gets colder to the point of freezing as you ice skate along platforms. The GPU jungle is full of bright foliage and crumbling mountains, all being rendered seamlessly without need to pause and load in the next immaculately detailed area. And the SSD speedway, where flying cars zoom past you, simulating the fast speeds of the hard drive, and the second half has you traveling through the vastness of space, which you could read as the vast amount of memory in the hard drive waiting to be filled in. It's self-aggrandizing to a sickening degree. The whole game is basically an ad to help drive home the PS5's capabilities, but admittedly, it's a good ad, because the game itself is very fun to play. Simple controls that feel fluid as you jump over gaps with your little rocket boosters, and wall up enemies with your tiny fists. Every level also has a sort of vehicle section that has you using the controller in different ways to get around. Rolling around by swiping the touchpad, scaling cliffs by tilting the controller and using the adaptive triggers to grip handholds, bouncing around by pulling the trigger to coil your spring for larger leaps, and my favorite gimmick section has you flying a rocket by pulling down on the triggers, and it just feels and sounds the most satisfying. The rhythmic clicking of the controller and smooth movement as you try to use your thrusters to light fuses to find secrets and do a little boss fight, but mostly because during those sections all I could think about was that rocket ship song from Game Grumps' Kirby Epic Yarn playthrough that then got an amazing remix by Chetrio and animation by Pixel Pit, so I was greatly amusing myself with that association. Thoroughly scanning the levels for some cleverly hidden secrets, all the puzzle pieces and artifacts you find accumulate in the PlayStation Labo, an archive for everything you've collected that are even interactable. And while you're looking for all the pieces to complete your collection, you'll also be finding references to other PlayStation franchises in the form of the Astrobots in cosplay or doing reenactments. A lone traveler getting ready to take on a giant that's holding a similar weapon from Shadow of the Colossus, a Bloodborne hunter showing the grass what for, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine from Resident Evil hiding from zombies, even Kratos and Atreus are just chilling in a boat at the beach. Enjoy the sun while you can, boys! Fimbulwinter is gonna be rough. Astro's Playroom is a nice little game that becomes a grand museum of the history of PlayStation. Although it's also partially a graveyard for a bunch of things that Sony pushed really hard before dropping support even harder. The PlayStation Move was meant to capitalize on the success of the Nintendo Wii, and even though they apparently worked pretty good, the biggest function they ever served was being repurposed for the PlayStation VR a generation later. And it's weird seeing Sony hoist up their handhelds as if they aren't infamous for how they handled their support and their supporters. Even some of the references can be a bit upsetting when hindsight rears its head. Take the Crash and Spyro references, two of Sony's flagship series on the first PlayStation, and now Microsoft owns the companies that owns them, and the studios have been ruptured. Not to end on a cynical note, because in all seriousness, Astro's Playroom is a solid game that I kinda wish we had more of. If you've got a kid or a young relative, they might love this due to all the cute robots, the simple controls, and the feeling of the controller animating in their grips with the variable sounds and vibrations based on their actions will probably delight them. Astro's Playroom is an interactive celebration of the past, leading us into what will hopefully be a bright future. Despite Astro being a celebration of PlayStation's history, Sony does like ignoring some of their long-running mascot series. We haven't seen a new Jak and Daxter or Sly Cooper game in over a decade. Well, at least Ratchet and Clank get a new game every once in a while, including their latest interdimensional adventure, Rift Apart. To thank Ratchet for everything he's done for him, Clank has rebuilt the Dimensionator, so Ratchet can finally find the other Lombaxes. He seems hesitant for some reason, but Dr. Nefarious swoops in, and in the scuffle to get it back, the Dimensionator is destroyed, separating our duo, trapping them in an alternate dimension where Nefarious has conquered the galaxy. Clank gets got by a female Lombax named Rivet, and Ratchet eventually stumbles upon an indecisive warbot named Kit. The duos keep changing up as they fan out across the galaxy to rebuild the Dimensionator and take down Dr. and Emperor Nefarious. Have you played a Ratchet and Clank game before? If so, you basically know where everything is going, story and gameplay wise, but I mean that with deep affection. Ratchet and Clank's bromance is endearing like in the reboot, but this is taking place after the main continuity, so they've been through so much together. So when they're separated and working with their alternate dimension counterparts, they approach forming those new relationships with some experience. Rivet starts out very guarded. Her trust is hard to earn and really easy to lose, and if she knows how to push someone's buttons, she'll slam it. She kind of acts a bit like Ratchet in the very first game at times, but she holds herself with confidence whenever someone is in danger, and is willing to risk it all to help anyone. And Clank's patient demeanor gives her the space to open up on her own terms, even if she's not a fan of some of his quirks. Ooh. Meanwhile, Ratchet is eager to team up with Kit, who doesn't trust herself to keep anyone safe, but Ratchet's unwavering friendliness has him gently pushing her past self-doubt to help her realize how strong she can be. He certainly has grown up a lot since the beginning of the series, and is making a better first impression than with Clank the first time they met. These new team-ups have very familiar but still very different dynamics, and seeing these new pairs grow together very fast because of that familiarity is nice. And when they do happen to be all together in the same room, the mix of clashing yet similar personalities can lead to some fun character moments. And they need to learn to work well together fast, because there's a whole dimension full of problems to solve before a nefarious grip has them deadlocked. Traveling across the galaxy and hopping into the nexus between parallel worlds. Rifts are breaking open across the sky and all over the battlefield that you can use to your advantage. You're not pulling yourself across the dimension to get around, you're pulling the dimension into you. And it's so seamless you kind of forget how impressive it is. Because that was a big part of the marketing for the game and the PS5, is that the load times are lightning fast, and whole worlds can be rendered in-engine and transition between in a blink. And there are some huge worlds to explore to rebuild the Dimensionator that make you feel like you're walking around in a bubbly Pixar movie. The mining planet Blizar Prime has been destroyed in one dimension, but you're able to hop into another to get around and continue to go back and forth to maneuver the destruction. Savali is a huge sandbox-like area full of secrets and lore about the missing Lombaxes lost to the other dimensions. Introducing maybe my favorite gadget in the games with the hover boots, because you can zip around at high speeds and it just feels so smooth and cool. And Zerky's Gastropub and Battleplex, where you can do arena challenges and get loads of bolts and other collectibles. I love me some Ratchet and Clank arena challenges. and some of these are really hard without some upgraded weapons. But those are easy to come by because you upgrade your tools of destruction just by using them, giving you plenty of options to blast, blow, and badger any and all that get in your way. From returning motifs to all new ones, the types of equipment you'll unlock as you go is full of surprises that try to take advantage of the adaptive triggers in subtle ways, mostly to ready alternate fire modes or be more accurate with grenade and turret weapons. The shotgun-like enforcer fires through one barrel with a half press of the trigger, but then you can pull all the way down to fire off both barrels in a larger spread. The Headhunter sniper rifle can slow down time during the zoom in before committing to your devastating shot. One of my new favorites is the Negatron Collider, which you can charge by half pressing the trigger and holding it until you decide to click down all the way and fire a huge beam that stays for longer as it levels up and gets upgrades. And speaking of both those things, it feels as great as always to use a weapon to the point it becomes a greater version of itself when it reaches max level, gaining new functions or extra effects as it physically changes to wreak more havoc. Then they can be souped up even more by spending Raritanium to unlock clusters of nodes for even more effects. The trigger gimmicks do get repetitive as you get to the back end of the game, and they just kind of taper off. There's even a joke about how the rocket launching Warmonger's special effect is just firing a rocket by pulling down the trigger. Regardless, the weapons are still fun and one of the major highlights of the game, and while I haven't gone back to do my challenge mode playthrough yet to unlock the Omega versions, I'm sure it just gets crazier. And the fact that so much beautiful looking chaos can be rendered without the game stuttering or having its frame rate dip for even a moment is super impressive. Between all the types of mercenaries and nefarious troopers, you'll be using everything in your arsenal, especially on the higher difficulties. It'll take everything you've got to withstand this full frontal assault. Man, all these Ratchet and Clank game title references really make me want to go back and play some of the older titles. It's a shame though that the most convenient way to do that is by streaming them through PS Plus, which, after all this time, is still pretty lousy. Come on Sony, can't you do what you did for Jak and Daxter and just give us some up-res ports, so we can at least download the games and play them without input lag or constant crashing? Even Lost Frontier has gotten a port now. I just want to replay Up Your Arsenal. It's still one of my favorites because of the weapons and comedy. Speaking of, Rift Apart is also really funny and has some great comedic timing. The returning cast sounds great as usual, and Dr. Nefarious especially shines here, as Armin Shimmerman elevates him to the most extra he's ever been.
Did I do it? Oh, what is this? What's with all the neon?
More people need to be reminded that this is the same guy who voiced Andrew Ryan in BioShock.
A man chooses. A slave obeys.
And speaking of performances, Jennifer Hale is always phenomenal, but she plays Rivet perfectly here. Every cocky one-liner, exasperated scoff at every new wrinkle of a problem, gentle affirmation of a world well saved, even giggling about how she's probably going to die. She runs the emotional gauntlet and it all sounds amazing.
What have you done?
Who are you?
Someone with a lot of questions.
Rift Apart does have its minor gripes. You can see some of the plot points coming from a galaxy away, and there's so much chatter that sometimes voice lines get cut off. Maybe more could have been done with the alternate dimensions rather than just 2, but I suppose that's a sequel hook for another day. I kinda wish there was more gameplay differences between Ratchet and Rivet to make them stand out more mechanically from each other, and some character things feel like they could have gone farther but didn't, and overall not a whole lot happens. It's mostly fixing a mistake that Clank takes the blame for, even though Ratchet should really be the one taking the brunt because he's the one who damaged the Dimensionator. Probably because it was his anxieties about meeting other Lombaxes that maybe caused him to try and intentionally destroy it so he couldn't go, but it's not really acknowledged that way. Again, those are minor gripes because overall, Rift Apart is a great time with some crazy gameplay set pieces and some nice character moments that have made new bonds that will hopefully continue in future adventures. I'd totally be down for a full-on Rivet and Kit game, but the heart of the series has always been Ratchet and Clank. Even across dimensions, they'll always find a way to get back to each other. A new console generation brings in a slew of new games built for the new hardware, but some older games may end up running better with the boost in power. Some games even get a big upgrade patch to take full advantage of the higher resolution and performance, and those upgrades are often locked behind a paywall for the game you already bought. Thanks Sony for popularizing yet another upcharge the games industry is now running with. These companies are run by Shinra villains, it's so blatantly evil. Speaking of, Final Fantasy VII is one of the most beloved games ever, and it's one that completely passed me by. It came out the year I was born, and I didn't get around to playing it until I was in college. And when I did, when the PS4 version released, I used the in-game cheats to blaze through it, and by doing that, I absorbed nothing. My understanding of the story came from the completionist Final Fantasy VII month back in 2014, where he reviewed all the games and supplemental material, but those videos have been delisted for a while now. And Team 4 Star's Machin Abridged, which is really funny, while also giving the story the justice it deserves.
I'm sorry, but a good dog can't let his bestest friend do this alone.
Red, how'd you find us?
I followed the trail of dead bodies. Now I'm full.
And with that all said, the Final Fantasy VII Remake was one of my favorite releases of 2020, for extensive reasons that are going to bloat this section if I even get into it a little bit. Just like how Final Fantasy VII Remake has some bloat in some of its sections, but in the end, has amazing characters and world building, coupled with its fun twist on active time battle that the original game was known for. In mid-2021, it got an upgrade for the PS5 called Intergrade, which made it play even smoother and made everything, and everyone, look even more stunning than before. Unfortunately, I lost my original completed save file, so I'm still in the middle of my replay, but I'm getting myself caught up again to eventually get around to Crisis Core Remake and Rebirth. But in the meantime, I can finally play the story expansion that came with the Intergrade upgrade, Final Fantasy VII Intermission, a short campaign where we play as the ninja thief of Wutai, Yuffie Kisaragi. I have to say though, a console-exclusive game? Fine, that's understandable. A console-exclusive story expansion? Now that's just ridiculous. But we're here now, so we might as well get to it. Our cute Konoichi has arrived in Midgard to join up with Avalanche in the battle against the Shinra Corporation. Yuffie in particular has a shuriken to grind since her hometown of Wutai has been at war with Shinra for a long time, the latter of which is trying to leverage the attacks of Barrett's sect of Avalanche to reignite the conflict. She teams up with a fellow Wutaian named Sonon as they plan a heist into Shinra headquarters to nab a supposed ultimate materia they've been working on. My only exposure to Yuffie in terms of video games was her cameos alongside other Final Fantasy characters in the Kingdom Hearts games, where she really didn't do much outside of being in some optional boss fights. And in terms of Final Fantasy VII Original, I went through my entire playthrough wondering when she was going to show up, not realizing that she was optional. Same thing with Vincent. Sorry guys, maybe in Rebirth we'll finally get a chance to hang out. But in Intermission, where she's immediately in your face, I really like her. She's this adorable klutz who moves around eccentrically even in casual conversation. She acts childish, but she knows when she's being condescended to. And she's way tougher than she looks and has the ninja skills to offset her bumbling. In combat, melee attacks are an acrobatic barrage of kicks and slashes with her giant shuriken, but Yuffie's real strength is her ranged jutsu, being able to change the element of her attacks, making her super versatile. On top of some really strong abilities, especially her banishment attack, which builds up charges as you spend ATB on other moves. So when you finally unleash it, it can just erase an enemy, and be especially useful in the middle or late into the bigger fights. But the real highlights of the DLC are the side quests, one being a scavenger hunt around the Sector 7 slums to find posters for a bar called the Happy Turtle. You know when you're close to one because each of them has a unique theme playing near it, and when you pick them up, your controller plays an adorable jingle. I'm only using Happy Turtle remixes for the background music in this section. Old Snapper says you're welcome. And then there's the Fort Condor mini-game. Summon Shinra units with your gradually recharging ATB and destroy your opponent's squawking bases. It's just Clash Royale, but with no monetization, so it's automatically more fun. And fun it is as you compete against increasingly tough residents and visitors of the Sector 7 slums, all the way up to the Grandmaster. There's a Fire Emblem-like weakness wheel, and you can customize your loadout for different types of units with different costs, and you can switch out your board to increase the speed of your ATB recovery and make your bases more durable. And selecting the right combination of units to counter your opponent's build is crucial. Johnny has a variety of ranged and defense units, but no vanguards, so you can snipe his durable units and then counter his own snipers with an aggressive offense. Wedge has mostly strong high-cost units, but if you can counter his slow rollout with waves that exploit his weaknesses, you can overwhelm him. There's a fun bit of tension trying to figure out what to spend to stop the advancing enemy or to get another unit you need in rotation, whether you win by demolishing their birdie bases or holding the line while you're secretly funneling small units to whittle down their base to eke out a victory in sudden death. And give myself enough breath on that take. It's a satisfying strategic victory. Winning matches gives you coins to spend on new boards and pieces, and some can be found in the world before leaving for the final stretch, which I did didn't realize until after I had already beaten the Grandmaster, so don't make the same mistake as me. Also, Fort Condor turns out to be foreshadowing nearly all the enemy types you'll be going up against when you finally break into Shinra HQ. The board game for children doesn't really sell how dangerous these mechanical monstrosities truly are. The battles in the back half of the story are really tough, but it's a good thing you got Sonon as backup, dealing heavy damage with his staff to support Yuffie's crowd control abilities, or aggroing enemies towards him so she can get some distance. The dynamic between the two is an interesting push and pull. Sonon is a composed warrior, having a deep admiration for Yuffie's father, and he respects her position as his superior. But she also reminds him of his sister, and that makes him even more protective of her. Yuffie realizes that's what he's doing, and she hates it. She appreciates his acknowledgement, but wants to separate herself from her father and not be infantilized by others. I'm excited to see how this version of Yuffie mingles with the main cast, and how her story will progress beyond the bounds of intermission. If you wanted more of Final Fantasy VII Remake, this delivers with its characters and combat, and makes me more excited to play Rebirth, eventually. Yuffie still has some growing up to do, but a ninja is one who endures, and there's a long path still left to travel, and maybe one day, she'll be allowed inside the Happy Turtle. You know, these games have been great so far, but they're missing something important. Democracy! I stumbled upon a physical copy of Helldivers not knowing what it was, but it blew me away. A twin-stick shooter where you battle hordes of giant bugs and cyborgs, all in the name of liberty. Now its sequel, Helldivers 2, is a full-blown third-person shooter where you're doing basically all the same things. Super Earth is a bastion of freedom for all of humankind, nestled in the center of the galaxy. But on one end of the known universe, there's the grotesque and monstrous bug creatures called the Terminids. Dreadful monsters that clearly hate the indisputable perfect democracy of Super Earth. And on the other side is the automatons. Soulless machines that do the same things as the Terminids for probably the same reasons. Liberty-hating heathens! How are the free people of Super Earth going to handle this? By being aggressive first, and sending hundreds of troops into their territories, destroying their nests and factories, and laying claim to their planets. Now that's what I call freedom. In order to be a part of this glorious peacekeeping campaign, you decide to join the army. After making it through the boot camp where you prove you are a totally qualified combatant and leader, you are immediately put in charge of your very own super destroyer ship, which you can name from set words and phrases. I name mine the Harbinger of Democracy, spreading liberty, one orbital strike at a time. Wow, that sounds abhorrent saying it out loud. Thank God this is all under the veil of irony inside the setting of the game's universe, and that switch gets flipped off as soon as the game is closed. Could you imagine actually believing in this kind of unquestioned nationalism? If you said anything like this in real life directed at real people, it would make you some kind of ghoulish freak that definitely shouldn't be anywhere near a position of power over anyone! Reeling it in a bit, Helldivers 2 is genuinely a really fun game, and the oorah nature of it is a big part of the appeal. The gunplay feels really good, and it's a good mix of feeling like an indestructible bulwark of liberation, taking on a whole planet's worth of enemies with ease. But also, you are just a human, and if anything actually gets close to you, you're going to die a death so excruciating that in your final moments, you may actually regret becoming a pawn for the uncaring Federation.
Becoming a Helldiver may result in decapitation or mortification. Not all Helldivers survive.
You have loads of different weapons to unlock and use between semi and fully automatic assault rifles and submachine guns, shotguns that will light the haters of democracy ablaze with your freedom, grenade launchers to make quick work of their homes and businesses, and more to serve up liberty in all sorts of delectable flavors. But if you get too excited spreading democracy in the form of bullets, you may end up running out of them. Reloading takes time and lowers your mobility, and you discard anything that was left in the clip. So, picking the right moment to stop and freshen yourself up is a good plan, as to not desperately scramble to get a weapon ready and risk a part of your body getting wounded, making it harder to reload your weapons or run away from the battle. You're not scared of the enemy? It's called tactical cowering. I mean, some of these bugs are really big, and the automatons are very sharp and explodey. We may need to call in the really big guns in the form of the deployable stratagems. Heavy weaponry, varying types of airstrikes between firebombs, gas grenades, and the good old-fashioned carpet bombing, special items like a drone to watch your back or a jetpack to maneuver around, even calling down more Helldivers because you smash someone on your way back down. Be mindful of the friendly fire, because while it can be very funny to hit yourself with your own explosion or accidentally blow up one of your companions, you've got a limited amount of respawns, so die responsibly. Again, it's a great push and pull of feeling strong and being weak, and trying to punch in a combination on the D-pad to dropship something that might save your life, or doing a mini game to complete the objective and not being sure if something's creeping up on you is tense but also fun. I remember hearing about the server issues at launch, but for me I've had very few problems, and my internet has a tough time with other online games. My internet keeps dropping me in the middle of Master Duel, but Helldivers has been working pretty well for me. And while I'm sure playing with friends would be more fun due to better communication, it's still been fun playing with random people. Even after playing for shy of 10 hours so far, I know I'm only scratching the surface, with higher difficulty missions still to unlock, and more gear and Super Destroyer upgrades to make spreading democracy even more efficient. It takes a little bit to really get going, but once you've earned a good amount of medals and XP to buy new weapons, stratagems, and armor pieces via the war bonds, your gameplay variety can really open up. There are microtransactions in the form of credits to buy rotating items and open up the newer battle passes. I'm not crazy about the monetization, but at the very least, it's not terribly intrusive, and the first war bond is free, so you can unlock some credits in it, and rarely you can find some during a mission. So you could slowly build up to buying the next war bond or buying an item in the shop. And there are some cool pieces of armor to unlock that give you slight stat changes based on their size and utility. But my favorite piece of customization is setting the voice packs to random. It just really accentuates that every time you die, your last character is replaced by someone new, and if they happen to survive, they are now the commander of your ship. It's very schlock mercenary in just constantly rotating out random enlisters into picking up the pieces of the last guy that's now in pieces. I also like that the items in the shop have these fake reviews, which might be obnoxious in any other game, but here it's funny because it's another layer of the in-universe propagandizing. It's fun to just go with the flow in Helldivers, saying one-liners after taking out big targets or simply yelling out "Democracy!" as you rack up a kill streak. It's very funny and exciting. But through bits of lore you find on the planets or messages you get from the Federation itself, you realize taking everything at face value is a mistake. From learning that the Terminids actually produce oil when they die, and that they were being farmed on Super Earth for decades before they somehow escaped, and the experiments that were done to them to make them repopulate faster have made them evolve into the titans they are now. In the first game, one of the main enemy factions was the Cyborgs, humans formerly of Super Earth who left to escape the iron grip of the Federation, only to get attacked and labeled as socialist traitors. The automatons now are either the cyborgs in a newer form or created by them, becoming even more mechanical and losing more of their humanity in order to stand against the minions of Super Earth's fascist regime. It is not subtle that we are actually playing the bad guys, but that kind of makes the gameplay more compelling. Every victory feels good because we have near limitless resources that we can just rain down, yet the forces against us is so overwhelming, we still feel like the underdog. It's fun to play the role of a mindless war machine throwing yourself into the abyss because you're so caught up in your own hype, you think you're invincible, while having unflappable loyalty to a military-industrial complex that is responsible for all the problems you've been trained to fix in the name of prosperity.
I am the hype!
Helldivers 2 is looking to be one of my favorite games of the year, but if I end up disappearing, it's because I got blackbagged by the Ministry of Truth. The gameplay and setting are easy to get lost in, and there's a lot of variation even in doing similar mission types over and over again, with a steady flow of cool stuff always on the horizon. In a world where live service games are floundering left and right, Helldivers 2 breaks that trend by simply being a really good game. Now that is something that's worth fighting for. Dark Souls is one of my favorite game series. What? A guy who makes stupidly long videos on YouTube likes Souls games?
Go on. No, really.
Dark Souls has completely changed how I look at video games as an art form, and maybe teased out that I'm actually a masochist. But the entry I put the least amount of time into was FromSoft's first attempt at the formula, Demon's Souls. Demon's Souls. That's a very awkward plural followed by a hard S. I've played a little of the original on PS3, but had a hard time getting into it after playing the games that preceded it. They looked better, ran better, and after learning the lore of like 3 different vast mythologies, Demon's Souls seemed more generic in comparison. When I was finally going to just suck it up and power through the jank, the remake was announced as a PS5 launch title. I figured I'd play it eventually, so I might as well just wait. Well, the wait is finally over, so now it's time for me to head into the colorless fog and see what horrors lie ahead. The world is overrun by demons. Most of humanity has had their souls torn from their bodies, so now in a zombie-like state, they hunger for the souls of those who remain. You are simply a lone wanderer trying to survive this scourge of demons and those they've tarnished. However, when you inevitably die, you are transported to a place called the Nexus, where you're given a new lease on death. Your charge is to travel to the different domains connected to the Nexus and slay the ultra-powerful archdemons. By absorbing their souls and those of their minions and worshippers, you effectively become a demon yourself. And by growing powerful enough, you can arrange an audience with the Old One, the original demon created by God to punish the hubris of mankind. If you forsake enough of your humanity to become a powerful demon, you may be able to spare what's left of it. It's a Souls game, so all that information is not presented to you very clearly. That's just my interpretation of what I eventually pieced together in hindsight after finishing the game, and then watching some videos of people who've already combed through every little detail. And while the lore is interesting, it's not necessary to understand in order to get sucked into the world of Demon's Souls. Traversing through every monster-riddled catacomb or trapline hall is worth it to see where that path will lead you, and what boss fight lies at the end of every line. The atmosphere the game thrusts you in can carry you through to the end, even if you never truly grasp what's actually happening in the story. The level design is unchanged from the original PS3 version. It just has a very shiny coat of paint now, and because of it, everything looks amazing. Elden Ring came out after this remake, but because Demon's Souls is a much smaller game, the environments are packed with phenomenal details. I've seen complaints that the new art direction saps away some of the grim style of the original, but for me, everything just looks so good. I was just always taking in the sights, even while I was in mortal danger. And to be perfectly honest, the gameplay felt so smooth that I take this cleaned up version of the design over the original without a second thought. You can see the starting points for many aesthetics that would be used repeatedly in the games that came after. The Stonefang tunnels are teeming with ragged miners that mostly ignore you as long as you don't get in the way of their digging. Breaking through their hardened skin can be a good source of upgrade material. And as you get deeper down into the lava-filled depths, the mine subtly turns into something more like a hive, inhabited by these dense molten insects that you need to have chase you down the tunnels in order to get around them. And then those tunnels suddenly lead into a massive furnace-like temple where a powerful roar echoes inside. The Tower of Latria I couldn't stop comparing to Bloodborne, and I meant it positively every time. The gothic, worn-down dungeons and torture rooms of the Prison of Hope, though repetitive, had me anxiously approaching every turn, investigating decrepit cells, on guard as to not be ambushed by the emaciated zealots driven to madness by their imprisonment, and the mind flare-like prison guards stalking the halls. Then you find yourself in Upper Latria, and it feels like you just stepped into the first draft of the Nightmare of Mensis, because in the center of the Plain of Spires is a giant pulsating flesh sack, and the rotten depths below it are crawling with body horror creatures that are barely keeping themselves together. But they press on, in no doubt horrible anguish, probably just to haunt your nightmares. Especially yours, Daniel, and of course, the putrid descent that is the Valley of Defilement, the precursor to all the poison swamps that we have to trudge through in the other Souls games because Miyazaki finds it amusing. The area was actually the easiest for me to get through, but after being up to my knees in murky plague water while being surrounded by diseased fanatics, I will never complain about Blighttown again. There's danger around every corner and creatures beyond your nightmares at every new turn. But it's all familiar territory to me at this point. This was the easiest mainline Souls game for me by a wide margin, but that's not a detriment to the game itself. It's just the experiences I've carried with me from the challenges that came after. Predicting that an enemy is hiding around a corner or finding hidden paths through subtle signposting is part and parcel at this point. And the moon grasses can be a source of nigh infinite healing. Even the smallest ones are still valuable because even if you have to eat the equivalent of a square bale of grass to fill you back up, it was still pretty cheap healing. And that's despite Demon's Souls being super punishing with your health. like taking away half of it if you die once, and then needing to beat a boss in order to get it back. Oh, people got on Dark Souls 2's case when it took away a small chunk of health that you could get back with an easier to get resource, but when Demon Souls does it, it's apparently genius. But in all seriousness, that's not even really that big of a detriment. Even if you're stupid like me and don't realize you've been picking up items that restore your soul until near the end of the game. There are plenty of spots to catch your breath and chew some cud, and even the bosses are slow enough that you can just make these prolonged moments to heal. The boss fights in Demon Souls are very simple and easy to read in comparison to some of the later games. But again, I'm not saying that as a criticism. It's just that after you've beaten Malenia, the Blade of Mikola, the Penetrator isn't going to give you that many problems. I've picked up on the rhythm of the game by playing the other ones, so its slower tempo is much easier to dance to. And that's kind of the deal with Souls games. They are difficult, and you'll inevitably die loads of times as you're learning the ropes, if you're not cautious, or underestimating enemies. But it gets much easier when you learn to pick up on what the game is trying to teach you on how to handle its obstacles. All throughout the Gates of Boletaria, you'll be picking up fire bombs and resins that give your weapon temporary fire damage, which are useful for throwing at barrels to cause chain explosions around enemies, and coating your blade to annihilate the Phalanx boss, because its heart and armed goo pieces are vulnerable to fire. On the ritual path, you'll find throwable kunai which deal poison damage. Doesn't seem super useful when all the enemies are rolling skeletons and ghosts, but the boss of the area, the Lost Hero, is weak to poison. So if you hit him enough times or find the weapon that has an innate poison ability, you can prey on his weakness. By picking up the details of the world building and thinking about why the game is giving you certain things at specific times, you can do a lot to help you mitigate the difficulty and save you some frustration. You can, but I still got real riled up even as a Souls veteran. I still fell for some obvious traps, got greedy against a boss and ended up losing my victory, getting ganged up on by enemies because I thought I could take them all on at once, or in my rush to retry a boss fight, the conga line of everything I ran past caught up to me. I just want to fight the cool thing again and move on, but I keep dying to this same enemy over and over again trying to get back to the boss. Why am I being tripped up by these pissant minions? I've already beaten 6 games that have thrown so much more at me. I'm better than this! The boss that actually gave me the hardest time was Flame Lurker, because my straightforward melee build wasn't doing much to his stony body, and my upgraded heavy weapons were too slow to chip away at him. Like every other monster down in the tunnels, he's vulnerable to magic damage, but I didn't have the items to give that power to my weapons. The only thing I had was an enchanted falchion I had found elsewhere, which was doing more damage and was faster. But instead of using my physical attributes that I had been focusing on the whole time, its damage scaled with my magic stat, which I had purposely ignored. It was still my best bet, so I just had to grit my teeth and dance with Flame Lurker until he was the one who got snuffed out. Yeah, I could have been more efficient. Magic works differently here than in the other games, so I could have learned a few spells. I could have gone elsewhere and finished other areas to level up and get some upgrade materials to make the sword a bit better, or saved up some souls to buy the expensive items I needed to make my usual stuff more viable, but in the end, I won. And that's the important part. Whether you bullheadedly brute force your way to victory, min-max your stats and equipment, summon other players to help you out, use all the tools the game gives you, or ignore most of them, your goal is to kill demons, and every method is in service to that objective. Plus, this world is miserable enough as it is, so get your dopamine rush in any way you can.
Can I kill demons yet?
Can you cut this rock?
No?
Then you can't kill demons!
Fuck!
A friend of mine has considered getting into Souls games. They've tried a few, but have never really clicked with them. The lore interests them, and they could probably push past the difficulty. But what really makes them bounce off these types of games are the oppressively bleak worlds. Everything usually starts off bad, and really just gets worse the more you learn. And it seems that every good deed is a thinly veiled obfuscation that makes things even worse than that. Taking Demon Souls for example, one of the archdemons is a holy woman named Estrella, who lost her faith in God after traveling to the Valley of Defilement, and seeing its horrid state, only to accept the power of demons and make the sickness of the valley worse. There's a lot of things I didn't pick up on my first playthrough. I didn't get wrapped up in the conflict between sorceries and holy spells, the former being quite literally demonized as it derives from soul arts, the power that was bestowed upon humanity on the first day they came into being. Then on the second day, God created demons to punish the immediate abuse of those abilities. But holy magic still works with iconography of the old one. strongly hinting that God and the first demon are one and the same, and the plot of the King Allant is simply to just let the demons win. Humans are foolish, deceitful, and vain, and being completely wiped out by the demons is the greatest mercy they can be given. Now that is horribly demoralizing. The theming has never bothered me, in fact it's part of the charm, but I understand why being pummeled with so much despair can be a real turnoff. But there is still hope to find in the Souls series. You have to dig pretty far, but it's there. It's the corruption of power, or the perversion of what inner strength is, that has led to the desolation we have to fight through. The obstacles are large, scary, and will not hold back. But they are surmountable, one way or another, by improving yourself in little ways, seeking out help from others, or simply working smarter and not harder. There is a way, and by pushing through these turmoils, we slowly get closer to understanding our own feelings about the world and those that are still in it. And even brief interactions can mean a lot. There's still something in this world that's worth preserving. Humans are foolish, deceitful, and vain. But that's not all they are. They can be brave, compassionate, and selfless. And by surviving, there's still a chance to shape the world into something better. Our body may die, even over and over again, but the soul, the essence of our being, can outmatch any demon.
This is not the end of me. This is the beginning. This is not the end of me. This is the beginning.
That said, I made a bit of an oopsie at the end of the game. You see, the bumpers and triggers on the DualSense are a little bit sensitive like the DualShock 4's. So, when I was supposed to just walk away, I instead walked up to the Maiden in Black to talk to her one last time. But as I loosened my grip on the controller, realizing the game was ending, it slid into my fingers and one of the attack buttons got gently pressed. Whoops! I swear to God that was an accident. Oh my God! Oh no! Jesus Christ. So yeah, I fat-fingered my way into the bad ending where you've basically given in to the influence of the old one, and now the world is as good as done for. I think the kids these days would refer to this as a big oof. Playing the Demon's Souls remake was an interesting romp, seeing the beginnings of themes and motifs that kept showing up in the Souls games that came after. It's still worth revisiting if you're a Souls fan, but for me, it's not overtaking any of my favorites anytime soon. I feel about it the same way I feel about Batman Arkham Asylum. It happened to be the last one in the series that I played, and going back to it after playing its predecessors is enlightening, seeing how much it got right the first time, and realizing how the mechanics evolved from its starting point. I recognize its great qualities, it might be better than some of its predecessors, but I still don't like it as much as even the most flawed of its follow-ups. For what it did and what it started, it still holds up, but I just have stronger feelings about what came after it. And that's how I feel about Demon's Souls. But like the other games, I'll be replaying it many times over. There are many more demons to slay. The old one hungers for more souls, and I will be the one to deliver them. Speaking of demonized, what happened with Forspoken?
We interrupt this program for an important news announcement.
You fucked it up!
Okay, so I'm just gonna be honest here. I had 4 more games I was going to talk about, including Forspoken and Returnal. I played both games for about 5 hours and was going to make it clear that they were just first impressions, but this video is getting longer than expected and I wanted to get this done before the end of April, so regrettably, I've cut it down to 2 games remaining, and Forspoken and Returnal are the ones that got dropped. I have things I want to talk about with both games, but I'm thinking when I've had more time to finish them, I'll make a companion video to this one where I talk about them in more detail with more fleshed out thoughts. This kind of messes up the narrative I was originally trying to weave, but for the sake of time, it had to be done. It takes time to finish another huge open world and a difficult roguelite, but there is something short and snappy to play completely: the Stellar Blade demo. I've been mostly catching up on the games I've missed on the PS5, but what does the future of the system hold? The next real big game on the horizon seems to be something called Stellar Blade, that got a demo near the end of March, and I thought it would be pronounced Stellar Blade, but apparently that's wrong.
Bart, run like the wind! Mom, it's wind! Well, I've only read it in books.
I completely forgot this game was actually announced way back in 2019, the before times, and was then called Project Eve. And more recently, it was shown off at Sony State of Play back in January, and it looked like a cool, flashy action game with a shapely heroine named Eve, who quickly caught the internet's attention. Big surprise, I know. Well, Shift Up, if you thought you could win me over by just having a jiggly woman in an over-designed skin-tight outfit and market the game solely on that, you'd be right. Hey, wait a second, that's the same developer behind Goddess of Victory Nikke. You know what? That actually explains a lot. I decided to check out the demo for Stellar Blade because while Eve is super pretty, I want to know what the game is actually like. Well, turns out it's like a Souls-like. And right away, it gives off strong Nier Automata vibes, as Eve helldives onto a desolated Earth that's been overrun by creatures called the Naytiba. Her squad gets taken out along with her friend Taki, and she gets rescued by a survivor named Adam. Wow, an Adam and Eve duo. I wonder if that's going somewhere thematically. From there, Eve sets out across the ruined Earth to find a way to take back humanity's home from these horrifying monsters that look like they came right out of agony. They escaped from hell to be in a better game. People online who had also played the demo have been saying Stellar Blade is like if Sekiro and Nier had a baby. The latter because of the whole premise and character designs, and the former because of the importance on parrying to chip away at an enemy's posture meter and deliver a devastating visceral attack. Eve uses her hairpin as a transforming weapon, and by doing her acrobatic combos with her light and strong attacks, you build up energy to use special moves like a barrage of jabs or a large sweep to hit around you. The Naytiba are these piles of flesh and teeth that seem like they're mimicking insects or just pulling random junk into themselves to take shape. They are kind of aesthetically generic, but the bosses and higher ranking ones look pretty cool, and the Souls-like aspects you'd expect are here in some form. Your bonfire is a little campsite where you pop a coin into a vending machine and just chill, lounging in a lawn chair that recharges your health and healing item pool while reviving all the Naytiba you've slain, buying new attacks and bonuses with your skill points and upgrading your gear with your collected resources, and dying sends you back to the last place you camped. I'm not sure if there's a consequence to dying because I only did once in the main part of the demo, and then nothing happened. Nothing to collect where I died, no lost experience like in Sekiro, just a jarring quick fade to black and then we revived like nothing happened. And oddly, I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed by that. Turns out this is actually a Bayonetta-esque spectacle fighter with mechanics that only appear Souls-like. It's hard not to make the comparisons to Bayonetta and Nier because Eve seems to be designed specifically to invoke both, in terms of looks and in story. Problem is, Bayonetta carries herself with unwavering confidence, while Eve stumbles around kind of cluelessly. Nier's demo that covered its first hour had seamlessly switched between gameplay styles and perspectives, making it feel more frenetic, and establish its leads in a way that immediately made them compelling and gives them chemistry. Even comparing Stellar Blade to Souls-likes isn't really doing it favors. It seems to be aping Sekiro, but mechanically, it feels more like Code Vein. And at least Code Vein took the Souls-like conventions and made them unique to itself. Stellar Blade just doesn't feel quite right. I can't really explain what it is, but it just feels like an awkward mix of both. It's too slow to feel as high octane as Bayonetta and Nier, but also too quick to feel like a methodical Souls-like, even compared to the much faster paced ones like Sekiro and Nioh. That said, the combat can still look and feel cool to do right, but the basic enemies don't really stimulate. The highlight of the demo is its ending, with the first boss against a creature called the Abaddon, where you're able to really strut your stuff. It dual-wields spine-like swords, calls down and infuses lightning into its attacks, being vicious, but also very readable, slashing at it while it readies a barrage of swings, giving enough time to parry and zip around with a follow-up, or blink out of the way of their bigger attacks. It was a great fight that felt like the right type of frantic back and forth, with a quick-time event to cap off the electric battle. After finishing the demo, you can tackle a challenge fight against a boss from later on in the game, with nearly all your skills unlocked, and some customization options to try out different passive bonuses, and dress up in other amazing outfits. With more tools for you to play with, you've got bigger combos and more defensive maneuvers to make openings or get some distance. The Stalker itself is simpler than the Abaddon, but it comes at you more animalistically, making it unpredictable with its quick attacks, and then it slithers away to disengage. And despite my gripes, I still got a good Souls-like tingle to wearing down my enemy, popping my last healing item, and then going in for the attack, knowing that one way or another, this fight will be over with this next clash. Eve may have my heart racing, but the gameplay isn't quite there for me yet. The bosses were great and give you more room to do the cool stuff, but the basic fodder feels like it's getting in the way, and it's looking like progressing to do all that cool stuff is going to build up very slowly. And there's not really a great narrative hook that doesn't just remind me of Nier. Maybe the mechanics and characters get fleshed out more as it progresses, because it doesn't feel like the demo really showed us the best of all its aspects. Taki seems like she would have made for a more interesting protagonist, but you know she's going to come back as a boss fight being corrupted by the Nativo or something to that effect. She's going to be Stellar Blade's version of Jean in A2. Because this game just isn't going to be able to shake those comparisons. I don't think this is a day one buy for me, but I'm hoping all my notions are wrong. This is just a demo after all, and despite me being lukewarm on some of its aspects, it's done its job to make me interested, and I'm hoping that the critical response is good when it comes out. I say optimistically, assuming I can get this video done before then. Like, comment, and subscribe if I got this video out before Stellar Blade released.
You fucked it up! Again! Oh my god.
Alright, so I'm just going to predict that I did not get this done by the time Stellar Blade released. I'd still appreciate those likes, comments, and subscriptions though. I wrote up all my thoughts after the demo came out, and as of recording this, the review embargo has been lifted, and the reception has been very positive.
I also think if you played the demo, you haven't really seen much. I think the game significantly gets much better and stronger as it opens up within a few more hours.
The combat is the obvious highlight, and apparently the enemy variety gets better as it goes on, with plenty of fun customization to unlock. But the downsides consistent with most of the reviews, including the very positive ones, is that the story doesn't take off until the back half, and that, unlike the rest of Eve, her personality remains very flat. That last part is especially a shame because, like with Bayonetta and Nier, the eye candy gets tastier the more layered a character is. But I guess I'll see for myself when I get around to playing it and see how it reviews with people I watch. Looking forward to Susie the Spear Hunter's review as of recording. Stellar Blade is probably going to be one of the biggest releases of the year, and congrats to Shift Up on their first non-mobile game. Hopefully its release and sales will be stellar. I think it's time to web this up. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero, and Insomniac's first Spider-Man game back in 2018 really captured the feeling of being our friendly neighborhood webhead. The feeling of swinging around the city never got old, and its brand of Arkham-style stealth and combat kept interesting and fun by always doling out new gadgets, abilities, suits, and special moves, while taking the long history of Peter Parker's superhero career and condensing it into this new adaptation by weaving in references to his past battles and setting up the new ones to define this version of the character. Spider-Man 2018 was one of my favorite games of its year, only beaten out by another Sony exclusive title. And then in 2020, we got Spider-Man Miles Morales, giving the fledgling web swinger some space to show off his own style and expand on the Spider-Man arsenal with his own unique powers, but also giving Miles more time to be a part of his community in and out of the suit, having more people to talk about his problems, and handling similar situations differently to Peter. It seems intentional that the stories of the two games hit on similar beats in order to create parallels between our Spider-Men and what motivates them to be better heroes. Spider-Man Miles Morales was one of my favorite games of 2020, only beaten out by another Sony exclusive title, and then they both got surpassed by one of the best games of all time. So you know, they were at a bit of a disadvantage. But released near the end of 2023 was Spider-Man 2, bringing our wall crawlers together for their biggest challenges yet. Now, I forgot to put spoiler warnings in the earlier sections, but I figured some things like Ratchet and Clank and Demon's Souls have been out long enough that I thought they'd be fine without. However, as of writing this, I got a reminder that Spider-Man 2 has only been out for 6 months, so that recency feels like a warning is warranted. So, this is your spoiler warning for Spider-Man 2. The game, not the Raimi movie. Not all of it, but I'll bring up some story beats from the midpoint, and there will be visual spoilers from the endgame, so fair warning. You can skip to the final chapter if you want to remain unsullied.
Okay, class, read chapter 4 or 5 or whatever.
Peter and Miles have been having a hard time keeping up with their normal lives. Peter can't hold down a job while his bills keep stacking up, and Miles keeps missing out on chances to make impressions to help him get into the college he wants, and is struggling to write about himself for his college essay. The Parker and Morales futures are looking more and more uncertain. But what is certain is that the Spider-Men are about to get even busier when the mercenary Kraven begins a new hunt in the concrete jungle. With him are zealously loyal hunters stationed all over the city, tracking down villains to be Kraven's new prey, some of which have even tried to turn over a new leaf. Peter's trying to reconnect with his friend Harry after his surprise return, and Miles is being extra vigilant to protect his family and friends from a now escaped Martin Lee. With new and old villains entering the picture, and the Spider-Man still grappling with their own inner turmoils, they need to find their own paths to navigate their lives without being caught in their own webs. Spider-Man 2 feels nearly identical to the previous entries in all the right ways. Third verse same as the first and second, but its melody of high-flying combat, snappy side questing, and superhero storytelling is always pleasant, even if it occasionally hits an awkward note. Swinging around the city feels better than ever, while not even changing all that much, just giving you a few more moves to make getting around even more seamless. Cornering buildings with a well-timed 90-degree swing, setting up your own slingshot to launch yourself through the sky, and the new web wings can be used to maintain some height as you weave through buildings, and a forward and upward boost to regain speed and height, all working together to make moving to the next objective feel fun before coming across the next group of bad guys and putting on a spider smackdown. Combat has been given a much bigger emphasis this time around, and that's saying a lot. Enemy hordes are massive, and not only do new enemy types show up over time, they start employing tactics to counter your aerial movement and powers. Your spider senses will be firing off near constantly as you are overwhelmed by Kraven's hunters, your average street toughs now mixed in with some fire-obsessed cultists, Sandman clones, and more as you web them up to walls to thin their numbers, use the new gadgets to throw them in the air or pull them in together to hit them with a powerful special move, or just toss them off the roof of a building. Don't worry, they'll be fine. No, really, they're fine. Even MJ has gotten tougher after apparently training with Silver Sable. Now her slower stealth gameplay is more active. She moves faster, can interact with the environment more to take out goons, she's got an upgraded taser and can take out enemies up close or from a distance with an attached web shooter. And you've got a little margin for error since she can take a hit if she's spotted. So her brief gameplay moments aren't as restrictive as in the first game.
That felt kinda nice.
Something I was wondering after playing Miles Morales was, gameplay-wise, how is Peter gonna catch up? He's got experience, but the new spider on the block has camouflage for stealth and sparking electricity flowing through his body. His special moves synergize well together and can combo into each other easily to just rip through large groups of enemies. Miles also gets his major Venom powers rolled out sooner, so that's primarily why I played as him more often to do side quests when I could, paying visits to all the hunter bases as a one-man army and ripping through their overwhelming numbers and learning more about Kraven's family that he had left behind. So, what does Peter have up his sleeve? Well, it's actually on his back, in the form of some mechanical spider limbs, a focused barrage of hits, or launching himself as a spiral of force and webs. It is cool, but it still kind of pales in comparison to Miles' Venom. And it's just the Iron Spider gimmick, so it doesn't really feel unique to Peter. Actually, as I'm recording this, it only just clicked for me that these could be based on the tech Otto and Peter were working on in the first game, so this is like the spider version of the Ock arms. Maybe I missed something in the game that just explicitly says that, but I'm not going to look it up. That's my headcanon now, and that's actually pretty cool. But soon enough, the Spider-Men, mostly unwillingly, stumble upon new abilities that are fueled by their rage. Miles somehow has his energy mixed with Mr. Negative's, giving his Venom this ghostly blue spark. With it being able to chain lightning enemies together, teleport above them, and slam down twice consecutively, it's a quiet, simmering anger that when it finally unleashes, becomes a storm of hatred. Meanwhile, Peter gets a hold of the thing that's been all over the trailers and promotional material, so I don't feel bad for bringing it up, the black symbiote suit. A morphing bodysuit that turns Peter into a roiling ball of tendrils that pulls enemies in and ejects them out onto the walls, manhandling multiple hostiles at a time and slamming them down violently. And fittingly, we even have a Rage of the Gods meter to fill up to go berserk and demolish enemies in a few hits. Peter's anger is louder and more violent, and it's directed at everyone he feels is in his way, which is effectively everybody.
You sure? He's got big teeth.
So do I.
In combat, there was very little margin for error, especially in the boss fights, which are ruthlessly aggressive, trying to keep the pressure on while needing to dodge attacks that will crush the life out of you, or using the new parry system to deflect the barrages of attacks. I've beaten Sekiro, but I've never been good at parrying, and even across all the hours I played, I still never really got used to it, because it felt more fitting to use my agility to move out of the way and bounce around the environment. Trying to concentrate on these long, multi-phase boss fights where making one mistake may end up getting you squashed is an endurance test, and it'll take all your spider powers to pull them off even on low difficulties, let alone the higher ones.
Regeneration is so cool. And so gross.
Tackling the various side quests and collectathons throughout the city will keep the Spider-Man's gear and abilities up to date, by earning experience and different tokens that can be spent on improving their gadgets, passively increasing their damage and focus gain, and unlocking amazing new spider suits. Both Spider-Men have their own responsibilities to attend to, so you can switch between them to do their own personal missions, or you can use either of them for some side quests, and their different perspectives shape how they approach every interpersonal situation. I liked using Miles to do a lot of the side content. Story-wise, he's been left to his own devices as Peter's been too busy, so it felt right that he was just always swinging around looking for leads on Martin Lee, and procrastinating on his college essay. The synergy of his Venom powers made a lot of the combat challenges easy to knock out, but even outside of that, a lot of Miles' story revolves around doing the little things for his peers and community. A collection of side quests where he lends a hand to some students, helping them finish up their projects or make their overly elaborate displays of affection go off without a hitch. A short quest line of finding stolen musical instruments to keep a cultural museum in Harlem open, which has a predictable reveal, but actually walking around the completed displays and learning some real musical history is a nice touch. A lot of Miles' dedicated missions are tiny in scope, but they're still important to him because he cares about his community and his culture, and making the time for them in and out of the suit is a big part of who he is.
Didn't you just finish telling me how busy you are?
Yeah, but I always have time for my community.
And it's time that he needs to cherish, because in other missions, he may run into a member of Peter's Rogues Gallery, and giving Miles a taste of who they are is setting him up for even more dangerous confrontations later on. Meanwhile, Peter's story beats are much bigger in scale, joining Harry at a tech startup with a grand vision of not just helping New York, but the entire world, going around the city doing experiments and test runs of the technology they're working on, and trying his best to make the world better outside of being Spider-Man. However, tracking down Kraven and dealing with the side effects of his hunt wears on him, and the scope of the problems grow, driving Peter towards the edge trying to fix them. But Peter is reminded of what he could be if he doesn't keep himself in check, or loses sight of his morals, like meeting up with his old cop friend Yuri Watanabe, who has now become a vigilante called Wraith, and trying to keep her from going too far with her own brand of violent justice. In light of that, I found it appropriate to often use Peter's downtime to cool off and do sightseeing by taking pictures of weird oddities in New York, or tracking down the mysterious Spider-Bots died around the city themed around alternate spider people.
I don't know what it is, but I just love this Spider-Bot.
Every story mission advances something important or unlocks another checklist for you to complete, so it moves at a pretty good click while giving you a few moments to slow down and take stock. Between uncovering a new layer of Kraven's machinations or helping an old enemy get out of a jam, the story is broken up by these very slow moments out of the spider suit. I know these are contentious for some because it grinds the pace down, but that's also kind of the point. Taking a moment to let the Spider-Men live their normal lives and being with the people they've been unintentionally neglecting. The amusement park is a highlight because it gives Peter a chance to just be Peter Parker, something he really hasn't been able to do for a long time, and only doing it for a little while has reminded him how much he misses it.
Harry's getting a second chance, but I feel like I'm getting one too.
Meanwhile, Miles gets kind of antsy not being Spider-Man. He wants to be out there proving himself, stuck in his own head with doubt, thinking he's letting the people he cares about down by not stopping things before they even happen. But they're all just worried about him and want him to slow down and realize that doing the best he can is all he needs to do to be a better hero.
A hero is someone who doesn't give up. And I'm not. I just don't know what else to do.
Going through the story twice, I realized there was a lot of really cool foreshadowing, recontextualized story beats, and world-building details I had completely missed that filled in some gaps I originally had. It gave me a new appreciation for the story. However, it also made me realize some of the cracks in hindsight, because while there's a lot of great moments and culminations, I couldn't help but feel some aspects weren't as strong as they should be. Despite how cool it is visually and mechanically, the symbiote suit is the cause of a lot of sticking points. It doesn't so much slowly corrupt its host as it's more like a switch gets flipped and then it just goes all in. And a lot of interesting character moments are kind of brushed aside because the suit is so obviously at fault that none of the vitriol it leads to is ever really lingered on. The outbursts that come from Peter and others are interesting, and I'm sure on some level it's how the characters really feel deep down. But those feelings haven't really been built up to be exacerbated by the symbiote, they're coming from it. A lot of the hostility only started because of the problems the symbiote causes, and its personality kind of drowns out its host, so it doesn't feel like it earned some of its bigger moments. Which, when he finally reveals his toothy mug, it makes Venom kind of a weak villain, because the symbiote itself is just trying to exploit the emotions of others, but it never works because everyone knows the symbiote is obviously evil.
This is what you wanted, isn't it?
Despite that, the climax is great, even though the third act is shockingly short. I also have a handful of gameplay gripes as well. The combat is fun, but stealth has taken such a back seat that there's hardly any moments to do it. The only addition to stealth is a new webline ability to make your own tightropes, but it's used so rarely that I forgot I even had it, to the point that several story missions that required you to use it needed to remind me it was something I could do. The progression also gets hampered in large stretches because the skill trees are divided between each Spider-Man's unique skills, then they branch out even more when they unlock new abilities, and then there's a third tree with useful gadget recovery bonuses and traversal moves. Getting a certain chain of abilities can supercharge your moveset, but you'll probably be splitting up your skill points between boosting new powers and occasionally dipping into the shared tree. The new web abilities are cool and very funny if used right, but I ignored that third of the skill tree because those abilities just weren't as useful as being able to grab more enemies with a symbiote yank, or putting points into quickly recharging Miles' Mega Venom Blast that would then recharge his other Venom abilities and all of his focus. Those are infinitely more useful than the webline double takedown at the bottom of one of the shared trees. Because there are so few points in the game to actually use stealth, the only reason it'll be useful is for getting the respective trophy a little bit faster. But speaking of trophies, like the other games, I did everything I could in order to get the platinum, because gripes aside, Spider-Man 2 was still a great time. Dedicated. First platinum trophy on a PS5 game. There we go. Once again making us feel like Spider-Man and the good and the bad that comes with it. A big part of the story is about second chances and how it's never too late to change and try to do good. That even if slowly, you can make up for your mistakes in your own way. Passing what you can on to others to help them do more good, reforming yourself by shedding your past life and going forward in earnest to do better, or letting go of your ego and finding a new path entirely. Peter and Miles are off doing their own things, so they don't have much time together to help each other with their problems. But when they do come together, they sync up so well that it all seems so simple if they had just taken the time to listen to each other more. Peter's lost a lot, so he needs to take a step back and take care of the people he has left. And Miles has to believe in himself, that he is doing enough for the people he's trying to protect. With great power comes great responsibility. To use it for the right reasons, to heal the world, and make it better, not just for yourself, but for everyone. To go above and beyond because it's the right thing to do. Be greater. Be yourself. Be greater together. Alright, I think we've covered enough ground. I wanted to have this done by the end of April, but due to busy work schedules, writer's block, and then getting really sick, and then getting writer's block again, I'm recording this wrap-up on May 20th. You can probably tell I'm still sick, but at least I got my voice back, and I need to get this done. It feels great, wanting to record some stuff to finish up some projects, and try and do some auditions, and then you get really sick. And as cool as I sound like this, I don't think I should be submitting anything like this. Although if I could find a way to harness this it would change a lot. This was a longer ramble than I meant it to be, but it was fun to make and it was fun playing the games I did for the video. There's more I still gotta get to, like the aforementioned Forspoken and Returnal, which I cut from this video for time. I missed out on Horizon Forbidden West when it released. Even though I could have played it on PS4, I was too busy playing Elden Ring on the Series X, so I'll have to give that a shot soon. Oh, wait, Shadow of the Erdtree is releasing soon. Well, Aloy can wait a couple more months, or years. I still want to revisit some games that have gotten some major updates, like the director's cut of Last of Us 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, and still some games I missed back on the PS4, like Death Stranding, and Days Gone.
Here, you can have this one back. But only if you promise to ride me as much as you ride your bike.
Actually, you know what? Nix that last one. And there's still more big exclusives to come down the line. Playing what I did has been fun, and it's cemented something I felt about PlayStation for a while. That we were too lenient with Sony last generation. Yes, I know I've just spent an hour praising the PS5 and what I've played on it, and have brought up how Sony's been involved in some games that are on my short list of all-time favorites. But it seems all those years of praise and sales have gone to Sony's head, so they think they're owed even more for the games they put out. Sony was carrying the banner of increasing game prices at the top of the generation, and now it's common practice, along with charging for console upgrades for the games you already bought. And even buying games has gotten harder, as Sony is shutting down servers and has shunned the indie market for the early stages of the PS5's lifecycle. It seemed like Sony was aiming to tout itself as prestige console gaming by resting on the laurels of their exclusive titles, but they really rested on them. Despite how much praise I've given a lot of the titles I mentioned, I do recognize that these follow-ups are playing it very safe. God of War Ragnarok is my new favorite in the series, a title previously held by the 2018 game, which has been exceeded in pretty much every aspect. But you can tell that it was supposed to be 2 games crammed into one, and the ending feels very rushed. I just got done gushing about Spider-Man 2, and while I really enjoyed it, it is still more of the same of the last 2 games. And that's not inherently bad at all, but it's not unfair to say it's not taking any risks. And that can be said for most of the PS5's exclusives, because most of them, even though they are great, are sticking very close to repetitive formulas. New or more daring IPs like Forspoken and Returnal either got ignored or very hyped up, but then dropped as soon as a new game in the familiar IPs released. Even the big releases really struggled. Rift Apart did pretty poorly early on, and it's only breaking even very recently. Can't help but feel that the scalpers hold a lot of blame in propping up the console sales, but making it so few people could actually buy and play the games on the consoles that were being held hostage. And while the newer big releases are doing better now, Sony has been hinting already that the PS5 is nearing the end of its life cycle, and it really doesn't have much to show for it. This console generation is yet to shake this feeling that it hasn't just been treading water up to this point, with unnecessary remasters trying to make up for the lack of something new, only really being able to offer negligible graphical upgrades that aren't really even noticeable, and reportedly even more are on the way. But honestly, I would prefer if they were up-res ports so we can actually play them sooner, and then those games wouldn't need to be streamed over PSN. And yes, I know I'm part of the problem because I'm still clamoring for a Bloodborne remake in the same vein as Demon's Souls. Sony trying to leverage itself as prestige gaming has screwed over a lot of their studios, because if a game doesn't blow sales out of the water, even millions of copies sold is seen as a disappointment. Come on, Sony, what are you, Square Enix? And even their successes they can't help but fumble. Recently, there was the whole Helldivers 2 debacle, where Sony tried to force PC players to make PSN accounts in order to keep playing the game, potentially locking you out of the game you bought months after release. The problem with that being, PSN isn't available in dozens of countries, effectively banning the game in most of the world. And even though the strong backlash has made Sony backtrack on it, Helldivers 2 is still delisted in those countries. And Sony clearly didn't learn anything from that whole mess, because now they're doing the same thing with Ghost of Tsushima. This is also not to mention the buckets of misconduct allegations of all stripes at nearly every level of Sony itself and their bigger studios. And all the success has not prevented all the layoffs that have happened. And don't you dare take this criticism of Sony as a ringing endorsement of other companies like Microsoft. They have their own boundless well of issues, like pushing for in-game monetization in their big releases all across last generation, forcing it into commonplace now, and hampering most of their exclusive games. Buying up Activision Blizzard, which completely halted investigation into their own abuse allegations while giving the CEOs responsible for a lot of it an even bigger golden parachute. On top of all the studios Microsoft has shut down, and this includes very recently shuttering Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin, for stupid backwards reasoning that they've been backpedaling on for weeks, making them look worse and worse. Those studio closures are heartbreaking. Arcane was behind Dishonored, one of my favorite game series, and Tango Gameworks blew up 2023 with Hi-Fi Rush, not only one of the best games of its year, but maybe one of the best games of the console generation. And apparently they were working on a sequel before they got shut down, while Microsoft was saying it wanted to release more games like Hi-Fi Rush.
What the hell is wrong with you?
I'm not forgetting about Nintendo either. Nintendo is such a quirky company that their controversies are almost entirely unique to them.
I gotta be honest, I can't get a beat on you, man.
I admit, I've lost the thread here. None of this is really relevant to the original point of the video. This started out as a fun romp through one part of the generation I had been missing out on, and catching up on stuff that I genuinely really enjoyed. But this generation has revealed so many cracks in the games industry. I just couldn't end this without mentioning some of it. I already felt this way, but this is just convincing me more and more that the console wars need to die. Because at this point, it doesn't even serve as a purpose to push companies to make better exclusive games. All it seems to do now is lead to more studio closures, while fanboys defend even the most egregious and cruelest of corporate meddling. If you make something new and different, the buying public shies away from it, and you get shut down. If you make something safe and familiar, you're lambasted for rehashing. If you make something new, original, and successful, you are still shut down. And even if you're successful like we saw with Helldivers 2, you still might be destroyed from the inside out. It seems like it doesn't matter if you do everything right or do nothing wrong. You end up in the same place. Another corpse on the pile to protect the status quo. Being told that you're appreciated and important to the cause, as you're sent off by the entity that caused this ruination in the first place. Hey, it's Tim for VO, recording this very late at night, and I just wanted to say thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I hope you enjoyed this massive ramble. This was originally meant to be much snappier and cover even more games, but it just kinda got too big and I hit a couple of speed bumps along the way. The ending kinda got away from me, but even still, I like how a bunch of things turned out, and hopefully the next video will be shorter. I've got full playthroughs for most of the games I've brought up across the video on my Let's Play channel if that's of interest, and on this channel I've got even more things to take up your time if you're willing to give it. If you'd like to support me more directly, you can pledge on my Patreon or make a one-time donation to my Ko-fi. Links down in the description. No matter what you do, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, like and subscribe and all that, and I'll see you next time.